Hello, Culture Matters podcast. We are back again with another culture content. I'm here to talk to you about, well, first, follow me on Instagram, Jay Doran underscore the culture man for short videos on business, life, leadership, culture, and so much more. Today, I'm unpacking one of these shorter videos, elaborating, elucidating, philosophizing around this idea that 41% of employees cite lack of recognition at work as a reason to quit. So 41% would cite a lack of recognition as a reason to quit. First, I'd like to unpack, is this recognition earned and not given, or recognition unearned and not given? The reason I think that's a thought to think about is, how much of this conversation is a consequence of our culture today. The older generation might say, "Oh, scoffing, that's the entitled generation." While at the same time, the younger generation might say, "Oh, that's the entitled older generation." Right? And now, why could each side? There could be an argument made on each side that the youth are entitled in expecting recognition when they haven't earned it, or the older generations are entitled ex, um, expecting more out of their people than they've modeled or they've earned the right to that expectation. So I want to try to unpack both these scenarios. Let's go with the generally discussed one, which is, the youth are more, they expect things that they have yet to earn. Well, that very well may be the case if, in the sense that in our culture today, um, we've gone from a society of personal responsibility and obligation with the lesser resources, lesser perspective, lesser abundance, lesser less opportunity would lead to more. It would exemplify more accountability, more things to be accountable for, more things that someone would have to respond to. Right, the greater the suffering, the greater responsibility necessary to survive. The lesser the suffering, the lesser the responsibility to survive. So there could be an argument made that in the society today, people have more entitlements as a consequence to more opportunity, more resources. And with more opportunity, more resources, we need more responsibility to burden the 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 choice set with that entitlement, with that opportunity, with that abundance. But the contradiction lies in that, well, what if it actually took a lack of opportunity, a lack of entitlement, a in response, an obligation, or the implicit accountability to actually create that responsibility, right? If one's character has a relationship with adversity or what one's faced, if character is on the other side of adversity, on the other side of overcoming, then how could we not expect lesser character, lesser uh, wherewithal, lesser power, lesser potential, lesser competence from a generation that's had more opportunity and had less accountability as a consequence of more uh, given versus less given and more needing to be taken. So there, we can go down that rabbit hole, right? Of like, is there a degree of less responsibility and more entitlement for the younger, or the, let's say, yeah, the newer generations? On the other side of the spectrum, um Who's to say that the organizations, who's to say that the organizations couldn't get away with more, more BS, say BS is like a too easy of a way to put it, that organizations can get away with less sacrifice, less responsibility as a consequence of more responsibility from the people. Because the pendulum can swing just the other way, the same. You know, what if we hold if so this is the point I want to make here is if the younger generation is actually more entitled as a consequence of more opportunity and less suffering, then that's a simultaneous call to greater responsibility of the older generation and less entitlement as a consequence of what it once did, which was be able to be responsible, suffer, carry the load. Now the older generation would expect that the younger did that, but if the younger is not doing that, then the older would have a higher degree of responsibility to carry that back. And so, just the same as the younger generation can be less responsible and more entitled, the older generation could be less responsible, more entitled, and maybe naturally is if it's older. It's like it's done its time. It's done its time. Now the expectation is that the younger comes up. Now, and so you would think, okay, that's the way it would make sense for it to be if the older can't physically or mentally carry the burdens it once did, then the younger would have to. Let's take the age thing out of it for a second. Just look at an organization with those with less authority, influence, and power, and those who are greater authority, influence, and power. When those with greater authority, influence, and power are unwilling to get their hands dirty, right? That's when it manifests rules for thee and not for me, or unwilling to live by the same principles they expect the people to live by. That's what we call a tyranny. That's what we call a system of governance that's become corrupt when it stops. And because the inevitability of a management, a leadership, a group or an individual, I think that manifests to an individual, it starts to break down, reduce all the way to the ridiculous, to the one, to the dictator, to the Leviathan, to the person that thinks for everyone and stupefies everyone as a consequence of them thinking for everyone. The institution becomes corrupt because that person now is living out like a messianic complex, and it's rules for thee and not for me because that's when the entitlement that comes from authority, influence, and power doesn't have a matching degree of responsibility to where the person at the top of the hierarchy is living by the same value set as the people at the bottom of the hierarchy. Everyone, regardless of how high they are up in status of influence, authority, and power, is held to the same expectation of values. That's where core values actually come in as something that's useful to a company, is that everyone is held to those same core values, and there's systems in place, there's governance in place to hold everyone to the same set of core values, regardless of their title, their influence, their power. And I guess my point in this is there's an equal amount of responsibility. When the responsibility and entitlement are not at equilibrium, things go bad. So if 41% of employees cite lack of recognition as a reason to quit, this started off with me, ruminating on, is it because employees are more entitled, or is management not as responsible as it needs to be in the age of the 21st century. It doesn't matter which is which. What matters is, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? What are we not doing? Why are we not doing it? And how do we move forward? So, for example, if let's think about if employees, what does recognition mean in the first place? Like if a management is not, um, if there's lack of recognition and that can infer a lack of growth, that can infer a lack of planning, that can infer a lack of execution, that can infer a lack of intention, that can infer a lack of a handful of capital reinvestment. Recognition can be as something as subtle as just speaking and affirming, which it would be a consequence of gathering. If there's gatherings and then there's speech there and there's things to be recognized and they're not recognized, that infers fear, distrust, disrespect, alienation. You get a group of people together that are open and there's trust and exploratory, and there have been goals and aims, and there's been execution and success. There will naturally be recognition. It's like everybody, Bob, look how great Bob did. A boss, a person in authority, is going to be willing to recognize Bob the more secure they are in their title, in their position, in their status. And the security of their title, position, and status will have a relationship to do with their own ability to execute, their own confidence in that. Are they doing the work or not? And that has to do with, is the company even being held accountable by the powers that be? It's third party advisors, consultants, investors, board. Are the leadership working? 41% of employees cite lack of recognition as a reason to quit. Of course, it's a reason to quit, because if you're doing the work or you're not being recognized, it shows your company is not doing the work. But you're not going to work for a company that's not respecting itself, and in turn not respecting you. You're not going to be bought into a company, a culture, a country that isn't reinvesting its taxes into making your life better. Now, if it is, and you're just alienated, you could be the problem. If it isn't, and you are all in, you're not going to stick around anyway. And like that's where you know leadership comes in, and leadership can become corrupt, and that's where the structures of how the company's set up comes in, because that increases or decreases the likelihood of the leadership becoming corrupt. And the leadership becoming corrupt has to do with the values and the education and the talent pool, and of course the product. And is it still viable? And or like if it is the company just getting away with the product being so great, and it's not as intense? It doesn't need to be as good on the management because the product is so great? Or if the product is so great, the management is going to be so excited and so bought in that as a consequence, management's going to be great? Or is it management's great, the product's not that great, but then you have a culture where if the product's not really that great, then people have to lie in order to keep the euphoria up, and you can incentivize with financials and gamification, all these things, but that's only going to last so long. And then you have a screwed up culture with, although it's high performing because it's a crappy product, then you could have a great product and you could have a crappy management, and the product's not going to be successful. If you have a great management and a great product, the product will be successful and the management will be successful. So maybe the product is actually extremely important, because if it's a bad product and like objectively bad, and it's an amazing management, you could culturefy your way to have sales. You might end up having some kind of cult. If you have bad management and a bad product, it's going out of business. You have a great product, you have bad management, the product's probably going to lead to the management being better. Now, I guess the management can ruin the product. Or is the truth of the product that the management have to be really, really bad for that to happen? Can great management make a good product better? That's the question. 9 times out of 10, probably not. Can bad management ruin a good product? Would it be 9 times out of 10? So, or is that just my own bias? That's a question. Is, what's more important, the product or the management? I would love to hear people's thoughts on that. Because is it the product's value that actually influences the management? That depends how delusional the management is. I'm going off on a tangent here, but I guess I want to mention this. Peer-to-peer relationships create meaning, and peer-to-peer relationships are very important for a company workplace to thrive, because people that build friendships at work are more likely to have meaning, significance. That if there are peer-to-peer relationships at work, people will push each other harder, even if it's unspoken. It's how our brains work. Like accountability is a consequence of responsibility, and responsibility is modeled. It's a consequence of the how the leadership at the top of the hierarchy works ultimately. It cascades throughout the organization. And so if the leadership is there, the accountability will take place. Accountability is a byproduct of mutual respect and trust, which has a relationship with how the leaders lead, because they start that domino effect. And accountability will has a relationship with peer-to-peer relationships, which has a relationship with trust. Or do people trust each other in the organization? And that has a relationship with, like, where are we aiming to? What is our goal? Are we going there together? Do we know what we're doing? Do we know what we're not doing? Do we feel like we could express ourselves? Can we actually tell the truth? What are the consequences for the truth? Um, do we believe in the products and services that we offer? Do they make a difference in lives? Like, what is the actual value of them? People have to believe in what it is they're doing and why they're doing it, and for it to be more than just a job. And there's a small minority of people that will do well just because it's a job, because they're self-motivated people. Those are eventually entrepreneurs, unless the organization grips them and pulls them in. But the majority of people, it's just a job until it isn't. And for even greater majority, maybe it's just a job and always stays a job, and that's okay too, because not everybody has, put all their lifeblood. You don't have to suck a person completely dry of their life to get value from them. Recognition tells the people who to admire. So, in a group of people, you admire, you recognize somebody that's actually going above and beyond and making it happen. That's going to tell other people you're paying attention. It's going to speak to something transcendent in our beings, in our psychology, about potential and achievement and becoming better. And in a capitalist system, becoming better is incentivized through capital. More pay, more bonus, more rewards, more opportunity for that person, whether it's just their selfish consumer interest of, carpe diem, seize the day, single life, yay, or what they can do for their family, their parents, their children, their loved ones, etc., their spouses, you know, their peer group. Recognition fuels people, but it also infers that the management is paying attention, because the management that's paying attention is going to want to recognize others, because although you can have a management that's paying attention, but it's only engrossed and consuming on itself. And even that's going to be a management that's not trusting, that's going to eventually eat the most competent people and spit them out and destroy them. So, like, an open culture reinvests in its people, even if that's through recognition. It's not necessarily just through financial, but it's through financial and it's through social clout, um, 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 spiritual acknowledgement. Even that's just like people higher in the hierarchy knowing people lower's names and being present with them and being intentional. So it infers disengagement if a management is not recognizing its people. And a general lack of meaning in the culture is making it even harder for companies to create engagement. So, yeah, and then we have all these macro changes, let's say. as society is evolving? How about the fact that employees all day long can look on social platforms and just see how life has got to be better somewhere else or for some other company, and like we're competing against the attention of everyone constantly. If I don't feel like I fit in my company, why would I why would it be so odd to look away, to I'm not getting what I need from my relationship, so another relationship is going to bring me into it. Now, at some degree, it's the character, the word of the individual to the company. They signed an agreement to work for a company, they're going to give it their all. I don't know if people are going to take their employment that seriously, nor, should they at that level. If the company, and that's where I think the engagement of the management comes in. If like there's really respect from the employees to the leadership, because they admire, there's a genuineness, there's an authenticity that's admired, then that's more shame on the character of the employee that's disengaged than, or maybe, the actual like the product, the service, the organization isn't in a fit with that person's wants, desires, expectations of their life. And that's totally fine. That happens too. But I guess if 41% of employees cite lack of recognition as a reason to quit, that wouldn't be very surprising based on the fact that so much of who we are as people has a relationship with our peers and others. And we get feedback loop from others about, are we doing well? How are we doing? How well are we doing? What opportunities are there? How close are we to fulfilling our subjective potential? And, a company that's not growing and reinvesting in itself and not paying attention is less likely to recognize its people. And if it's not doing any of those things, its people are going to resent it and not going to want to participate for the same reason people wouldn't want to invest their taxes in a government they didn't think was doing the right things with it. And you see that out all the time. But if you truly believe in where it goes, and you know, then people feel differently about those things. So it's about trust, it's about respect, it's about potential and idealism. And those are some thoughts. Follow me, Jay Doran _ the Culture Man on Instagram. And I'll keep putting out videos like this on the podcast, longer form. And please leave us a review on the Culture Matters podcast.